Parted company with Essendon in August last year. You said, when I get the opportunity, I'll tell the story that I think is the way it happened. Why is today the day?
Well, firstly, I wasn't able to speak for 3 years because I was under contract with the Essendon Football Club and under obligation. The Essendon Football Club didn't want me to speak, and I respected that obligation. When I resigned from the football club, I didn't feel it was the right time. Now, with the CAS decision being handed down, I think it affords all of us the opportunity, if we want to and if we need to tell our story. And my story, I think, is an important one to tell.
There are many people who have a valid story to tell, and many answers that we're hoping to get specifically from you today. There are so many tangles and arcs to this incredible story that we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll try and cover as many bases as possible. Now, there are those who say you oversaw a program that was pharmaceutical in nature, it was experimental by design. Was it your intention to cheat the system?
Well, firstly, I didn't oversee a program. I wasn't part of that overseeing role. I was part of the Essendon Football Club in a senior role at the time. There was no experimental program that went on. It wasn't of a pharmaceutical nature, and there was no intention by anyone, and Stephen Dank included in my belief, to cheat the system.
You say it wasn't pharmaceutical and it wasn't experimental, and yet all that we've read would suggest otherwise. Strange concoctions of things that people hadn't heard of, no one really sure what was given, the way it was done, whether there was any proven science behind it. And I suppose that is where the idea comes, that it was pharmaceutical and experimental.
Well, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I can't, I don't want to talk about or go into areas of science which I don't understand, and it's not my specialty. But the idea around the program was that it was a healthy program for the players to become better footballers and look after them later in life so that they didn't become old and arthritis and like a lot of us have. And the idea was that everything had to be put by the doctor, that the doctor had to approve everything. Now, the reason the doctor had to approve everything is because he's the one that knows the most about medicine. And at certain times, I believe the protocols weren't adhered to, and that didn't happen. And that was very disappointing, and is the reason that 34 young men are now in a position that they're in. And that's devastating for all of us, but most of all it's devastating for those 34 men and their families.
All right, over the course of the next 50 minutes, I'd like to try and cover a number of areas. One I really want to start with is that of the players. We'll talk about the club and the AFL and the handling of the whole ASADA investigation, and then we'll come to close off the personal impact that this whole scenario has had on you. But first to the players. As we know, this week the Court of Arbitration for Sport gives out its findings against the 34 past and present players. They've effectively had 2016 and potentially beyond, if what we read is correct about further legal challenges, wiped off their career. That's career ending, possibly for a number of players. How responsible are you for the position that those 34 are in now?
Well, firstly, it's devastating for those players. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's not just 2016 that's wiped off and potentially beyond, but it's been 2013, 14 and 15 where they weren't able to get the opportunity to play the football to their ability. I have a level of responsibility in that. I should have known more. I should have done more when the opportunity came, and I feel extremely guilty for that and bad for that. And I can only apologise for that. Because I made decisions in real time that in hindsight I think were wrong.
How many of the 34 have you spoken to in this past week since the decision has come down?
Via probably over half via text or talking. You know, certainly some of them you want to give some space to, and when they're ready to talk. But the ones I have spoken to, you know, they're deeply concerned about their future and what lays ahead of them, and they're very upset at what happened at the football club, but also at what happened to them over the last 3 years.
Have you spoken to the captain, Job Watson?
Via text we've spoken, and Job's very, as rightly, very angry, and also I think, I'm not going to speak for him, but I just feel that, you know, he feels very let down on a number of areas.
Does he feel let down by you?
I would say to a certain extent he does, yeah. I mean, I made a promise to Joe Watson and to the other players in 2010 when I decided to go and coach, or became coach, that I would create an environment for them that they could be the best possible athletes they could be, that they could achieve their dreams individually and also win premierships. Quite obviously, that environment hasn't occurred. And for that, I feel that they should feel let down by me, and I feel that I have let them down. So I think he's got every right to feel let down by myself.
You wrote a piece for the Herald Sun this week, over 2 days, and you said, as a former coach and player, I have many conflicting and deep emotions. Like what? Well,
I feel very guilty. I feel very sad. I feel upset for the players. I don't feel like a victim myself, but those 34 players are victims of this situation. A situation that at the first instance is the responsibility of the Essendon Football Club. The football club, and as a part that I had in it, has to put up its hand and said we made mistakes. But those mistakes were compounded by people in authority outside the football club. And so when I feel guilt, sadness, devastation for the players, I'm also upset at the way the procedural fairness, or the process was enacted to deny our players procedural fairness and the football club procedural fairness.
All right, we'll get to that. Let's talk about the club and how this all came about. You've detailed the club management structure. How can a high-performance unit headed up by the fitness coach in Dean Robinson, who then contracted the services of Stephen Dank, the sports scientist, not be under the control of the head coach? That would just seem to be a system that already is designed to fail.
Well, I can only say that's the way it was set up at Essendon, and that was the way Ian Robson, who was the CEO at the time, wanted it. And when I was employed in 2010, he said that's how he'd seen it done at other clubs. So I don't know what happens at other clubs, but I can only go on what Ian said. And what he wanted was for him to be the CEO, for Paul Hamilton, who was the head of the football department, to report into Ian, and myself, I would report into Ian. And Paul would be responsible for the high performance unit and everything else, and I was responsible for the players and the coaches and their performance on the field.
Now, it's clear that pretty much from the start, Dr. Bruce Reid, the club doctor, had issues with the supplements program. He had issues with injections, the number of injections, the unknown substances, the off-site injections. Where did he fit into that club structure? Was he part of your team or part of the high-performance team? No,
Bruce was part of the medical team, which had reported into Dean Robinson, and Bruce also had a direct line into Paul Hamilton. So obviously Bruce and I were very good friends. We'd known each other for 20-odd years.
Just explain that. How close is that relationship? Because I've heard it explained as though it's as close as a father-son relationship in many respects.
Bruce said to me 2 days ago, he said, I'm not sure whether you're my son or my brother, but you're somewhere in between.
So you were adamant that the program had to fit into a framework of 3 pillars. It had to be WADA compliant, the doctor had to approve everything, and it had to have players' consent. So how did that fail?
Well, I think the protocols that we put around it weren't observed at times. I believe that the protocols were observed on a number of occasions, and there's evidence to say that Dean Robinson and Stephen Dank did follow the protocols to an extent. But there were times they weren't followed, and this led to the breakdown in trust, led to the breakdown in relationships with them and the doctor, and led to where we are now.
That breakdown in relationship, signs of miscommunication and mistrust amongst the members of the group as early as January 2012, including the players who expressed some concern also. At around this time, you encouraged the doctor to put everything in writing and to let's deal with this. You say you never received that letter. Did the doctor ever mention to you that he'd written it and ask you why perhaps you hadn't responded yet?
No, he never mentioned as to why that he had written it or whether I had responded or not. But Bruce and I discussed a lot of his issues at length, and that's the reason he sat down and helped him, encouraged him to write the letter. So we had documentation that would go to Paul Hamilton, that would go to Ian Robson along the right chains. Now, in hindsight, Tracy, at the time I thought that was enough. In hindsight, I wish I had done more. I wish at that time I had acted more strongly and perhaps gone to Ian Robson myself and said, hey, this is not on. But I expected that letter would get to him and that things would be done. in hindsight, I wish we had told the players that perhaps the protocols had been broken. So.
One of the players, Nathan Lovett-Murray, his story has come out this weekend that he told ASADA during the investigation that on one specific occasion at least, when he was receiving injections, the doctor was there and Stephen Dank was there, and this is at an off-site location. He expresses the view through his manager that at no time did the doctor say to him he shouldn't be receiving those injections. Should the doctor have been doing more?
Look, I think everyone would sit back and say they should have done more. And that's why I say protocols, I don't think were broken all the time. I observed a lot of the time that the protocols are being adhered to. That's one example you talk about that protocols are being adhered to. AOD 9604 was approved by the doctor. And I think that we all should have done more. And I think Bruce would admit that he should have done more as well.
Should he have taken more responsibility at the time, and should he be taking more responsibility now? I'm not sure of your relationship with the doctor at the moment. I assume it's still good. You said he spoke to you just 2 days ago. But given these circumstances and given the fact that all of the officials at the club that were there during this period have now all gone, the only one remaining is Dr. Bruce Reid.
Look, I don't think Bruce should have to leave the Essendon Football Club. Bruce's primary concern at all times is the welfare of players. So Bruce is a very, very good man, and I think he's paid a price, not the price the players have paid. The players have paid the ultimate price for this, and their careers, a lot of them, are either ruined or they've gone back a long way. I don't know whether Bruce has taken enough responsibility or not. That's something you'll have to ask Bruce. But I do know that he has. He's borne a lot of criticism for this. So,
in about July 2012, there was a meeting of the most senior club officials, from the president down, where it was suggested that Dean Robinson and Stephen Dank be let go. Why weren't they?
It wasn't suggested, it was said that they need to be let go and they have to be let go.
Who said it and who supported that and who did not?
So it was at my house after a game. Bruce Reid, Danny Corcoran said to Ian Robinson and David Evans, the chairman and the CEO, that Dean Robinson and Stephen Dank have to go, which I supported in the conversation. Ian Robinson's response is we can't afford it, and we'll end up in court if we do. That's I think if things had been dealt with then, we might have a different story.
The problem is there's a lot of that if we dealt with it then, isn't there?
Yes.
And I suppose when you've got clubs that constantly talk about their primary concern being player health and welfare, the AFL, in fact, spoke about this, the current CEO, Gillan McLachlan, at his press conference in the past week, that player health and welfare is the number one issue. And yet here's a situation where clearly major concerns from nearly everybody in a position of power was overlooked due to club finances, and player health and welfare came a very distant second.
All I can say is it's very disappointing.
Most people have a view on this scenario, people that have either just been scanning the news over the past 3 years and others that have been following every step of the way as best they can. And probably the way they see you fits into three perspectives from what I can gather. The first one is that either you were compliant in a program that was designed to cheat the system, or the second group is they feel you were negligent in not stopping a program that clearly raised issues. And the third one is perhaps that you were naive in your handling of it. Can you see how people have come to those sorts of conclusions, and those three categories are the most dominant?
Well, I can see after the press that has been around this for the last 3 years that there's no doubt some people can form those views. I think that one of the biggest criticisms of the way this was handled, that it was out in the public from day one, and that ASADA weren't allowed to run their investigation the way they normally would.
So you don't actually have a problem with the ASADA investigation?
I'm quite happy for ASADA to come and investigate the Essendon Football Club. If they had suspicion that we had banned or performance-enhancing drugs or non-compliant supplements in our football club, ASADA should have come and investigated us. That is their role. And one of the really disappointing things in this, Tracy, is that we as a football club, and I know the people, are so anti-drugs. The people involved, the players who are the ultimate victims, are so anti-drugs. So for the players to be labelled as drug cheats hurts because they are anti-drugs. We support ASADA in investigating clubs. What we don't support is the way this investigation went about. So people have formed views about my role due to what they've been told in the media. Now, I can't say I'm upset with what their view is, because I know what's been written, and it was a tidal wave of information that we just weren't able to or allowed to respond to.
Okay, the other aspect people find hard to resolve, I think, James, is that they see you now and professional, present well, can answer any question. You had no idea what questions were going to be asked tonight. They've seen you as a player on the field. You could do no wrong. You knew what was going to happen. You were thoroughly prepared. You were totally focused. And people are trying to bring together the two James Hirds. They can't see how those two exist in separate entities. The player, with everything so well prepared, the person that presents today, and the person who was the head coach at a club where it looked like no one had very much control over what was happening.
Well, there is only one James Hird, and that person tries very hard at what he does, but has made mistakes. Yeah, as I said, you judge in hindsight and you judge yourself in hindsight. I made decisions, and so did other people at the football club who made mistakes. We made decisions that we thought were right at the time. Quite clearly, some of those decisions weren't right, and it has led to where we are now.
Let's move to the Blackest day. We all know February 7, 2013, so well documented. Two Labor government ministers standing up in Canberra with the Australian Crime Commission, with ASADA, the anti-doping authority here in Australia, with the who's who of Australian sport, warning the Australian community about widespread doping, the possibility of criminal gangs entering sport, and that it was, in fact, very widespread. But the drama for Essendon had already begun, hadn't it? Take us through the phone call you got from your president, David Evans.
It all started for us on the 4th of February, or for myself and the players and the administrators on the 4th of February.
So 3 days before the Blackest Day announcement. 3 days
before the Blackest Day announcement, when David Evans came into my office at the football club. We just finished an intra-club practice game. The boys were in great form. It was a really exciting time for us. And he came in and he said, you know, the AFL believes that we've been giving our players performance-enhancing drugs. And I was shocked. I just couldn't believe what he's talking about. My first question was, where's the evidence? What are you talking about? He had no evidence. He'd just been told.
Did he say who told him?
Well, the AFL had told him. 8:30 that night, I was called to his house. When I got there was the chairman, David Evans, Ian Robson, the CEO, Danny Corcoran, who'd just become the football manager, and Bruce Reid arrived 10 minutes later. And David grilled us as to what had been going on and why the AFL thought that we'd taken drugs. During that meeting, David was called out to a phone call and came back in and said, Andrew Demetriou says it's definitely us. He's been told about a report that's coming out, and the Essendon Football Club is the club, you know, that they believe has taken the drugs, are under suspicion. And from that moment, we were thrown into chaos because we didn't know what they were referring to. And we spent the next few days, and I remember getting to the club the next morning at 7 a.m, looking for documentary evidence that what had been given to our players was compliant with AFL, ASADA and WADA rules, like we'd asked in the protocols.
Did you find that documented evidence?
I found the forms that the players had signed, and I looked through those forms, and those forms talked about how everything they were given was compliant. And I took one of those forms up to Ian Robson, but I did not find the supporting evidence that was meant to be on the back of those forms about the compliance of the supplements.
Tell us about your relationship up to that point with David Evans.
Look, I think David and I first met in the year 1999 or 2000, and we became very, very close friends. Our families became very close. We were very close. So a 12-year relationship that, you know, that was very strong, and we had a lot of good times together, and we trusted each other deeply.
So the club is then pressured by the AFL to self-report in inverted commas. Nobody really knew what that meant at the time, because you say you were still looking for evidence. You still did not believe that the situation you were being accused of is actually what had been happening. You were asked to take a press conference and take responsibility at that point. Were you pressured at that point that the responsibility you should have been taking meant resignation?
Not so much resignation at that point, but there's two things that I was told in that press conference, that it would be in my best interest to be there, it'd be in my best interest and I have to take responsibility.
And who was telling you this?
That was from Liz Lucan, who was the PR manager for the club at the time. And then I was also told that I couldn't say that the players hadn't taken performance-enhancing drugs. That was my big thing. I'm quite able to go into the press conference, but I wanted to say and state that we hadn't taken performance-enhancing drugs, because I was of the belief we hadn't. And I was told that I couldn't say that.
Who told you not to say that?
Gil McLachlan told me not to say that.
And did he say why?
He said that his belief was that they had. He'd enough evidence that we had.
48 hours after the Blackest day, before ASADA has actually even begun investigating, the AFL deputy then, Gillon McLachlan, who is now the CEO, flies with David Evans from the Essendon club to Canberra to discuss with ASADA doing as much as possible to protect the athletes. ASADA says there's no way a deal can be done, but pressure then starts to mount for ASADA from the highest levels. There are allegations of almost weekly calls from Andrew Demetriou to senior government officials in the Prime Minister's Department, the Sports Minister's Department, again to try and pressure ASADA into resolving this case as quickly as possible because of concerns for the AFL brand. Now, if the players were to be protected, there was obviously going to need to be a scalp for this story. Do you believe you were identified by the AFL as the scalp that was going to pay the price for this saga?
Well, I don't believe I was told I was going to be the scalp.
Who told you that?
Well, those meetings happened on the 9th. I was rung by David Evans a couple of weeks later on our way to the GWS game and asked to tell the players that they'd be going to be okay. So I got the players together at the Virgin Lounge and said, David has said, you're going to be okay, nothing will happen. Now, I don't know why I was asked to say that, but I was, because Dave wouldn't tell me why. Then I was...
Why wasn't David telling?
I think David was in Canberra at the time, or wasn't at the Virgin Lounge, but he wanted the players to know straight away. I was then told by Gillon McLachlan later on that this is about the optics, and that, you know, in later on, that you're the person. How would it look if the person who's been the highest profile athlete or personality at the Essendon Football Club escaped sanction? We know you haven't done much wrong, but how would it look?
Through this, you're still coaching the team in the competition. The team's remarkably doing well, heading towards the finals. Who at this point inside the club are you trusting?
I trusted Bruce Reid at that time. I trusted Danny Corcoran. I trusted the players. And I trusted the staff in general. I have to say I trust the staff in general. The real core football department staff, they're very, very good people. But it became very hard to trust what you were being told via people in authority. Did
you then start to doubt yourself?
It's very hard not to doubt yourself along the way. But the two things that I kept thinking about was the players. I mean, we had an obligation to the players. We may have made mistakes in 2012. We weren't sure what they were because we were still trying to find the evidence. But the support to get the players to try and achieve their dreams and create that environment was still there. And we had a really good season in 2013, our best season in a long time, on the field. Because we were still trying to create that environment. The players were buying into that environment.
Despite everything that was going on?
It was really quite a remarkable effort by the players. I mean, there would be meetings, there'd be ASADA meetings, there'd be player association meetings on a Thursday or Friday before a game. The boys would barely train because they'd be interrupted by media or by what was happening outside. But they'd get out on the park and they just performed some incredible feats. I mean, the Fremantle game in round 3, the West Coast game that Joe Watson was booed at after the AOD. It was an amazing show of human camaraderie. And, you know, something they should be very proud of.
The spine and the strength in that came from a group effort.
It came from the players. They are, despite what people are saying about them now, they're the most remarkable group of men you will ever meet. The mental resilience they have. And that's why, in the end, every one of them will get through this devastating experience for them, because they are such incredible people.
All right, I'm just going to quickly run through some of the names in this story, and I want you to give me a 15, 20, 30-second snapshot on the role you believe they played in this saga. The first one has to be the CEO at the time, Andrew Demetriou.
Well, Andrew is trying to play his role, which was to protect the AFL. And I have some empathy for him in that, you know, he was put in a position not of his own doing, but of our doing. But I also believe that in the end, the procedural fairness that should have been followed wasn't followed by the AFL. And as a CEO, I think he should take some responsibility for that.
And the deputy at the time, who is now the CEO, Gillan McLachlan?
Well, Gillan was really the negotiator and the mover and I wouldn't say manipulator, because that's not a fair word, but he, like Andrew, was put in a position that not of his choosing. It wasn't his fault they were in this position, but you know, he was definitely the one running the show around this part.
The head of Essendon, David Evans?
Well, I think David was shocked. He couldn't believe that we're in this position, like all of us. And yeah, it was a friendship, and a man. He was a good man, David. Like we had a good time, but it's disappointing where it ended up with David.
How long since you've spoken to David Evans?
I haven't spoken to David since the Hawthorn game in 2013, so I think that's July. I'm not sure of the exact date.
Paul Little, who took over as the president of Essendon.
Paul was put in the most difficult position of any person. I mean, he came in as the club president after David resigned in July, and he had to make some pragmatic decisions. And I think Paul tried to make the decisions that were best for the football club. Certainly, the relationship Paul and I had was a very, very fiery one at certain times, and we disagreed on a lot of issues. But I do believe that Paul tried to do the best thing by the football club. Did he make mistakes along the way? He may have, and he probably admitted, like all of us. But his main goal, I think, was the best for the football club.
Dean Robinson?
I think Dean made mistakes, large mistakes.
Stephen Dank?
Same.
Bomber Thompson, who was your mentor?
Yeah, Bomber's a very passionate man, and he worked very hard to make the place as good as he could make it. But I would say that if you asked Bomber, that again he would be in a similar position to myself, that he wished he had done more.
And James Hird?
Well, I certainly made some errors of judgment. I trusted people.
Would you say your errors were of greater impact than the errors made by other people? I'm just trying to work out your level of responsibility here in what went wrong at the club.
I think it's hard to give you what my level of responsibility was. You can talk about the hierarchy and the fact that I was on a different line and they weren't responsible for me. But I had a big impact on that football club. It was a football club that I loved, and I promised the players I'd create an environment for them. But I do believe at all times I tried to make the best decisions for the players, and at no time did I ever consider that banned or performance-enhancing drugs would be at our club. It's just something that never entered my mind. And I still to this date don't believe that anything banned was given to our players.
Some people would probably see that as you continuing to keep your head in the sand and are hoping for a good resolution to this saga. But is part of the issue, James, that it was only 3 years after you retired as a player that you became a coach of a team in the biggest, most well-run sporting competition in the land, without the necessary training perhaps in that position? Were you the right man to have taken on that head coach's job without that experience?
Well, history will tell you no, that perhaps I wasn't. But I also think that you do make the decisions you do make at the time, and you do put processes around things, you do put procedures around things, and you hope and you trust people. Now, did I trust people too much? Yes, I believe I did. And would a more experienced coach or an older person or someone who'd been in that role have trusted less? Probably. So there is an element of that. But I'll reiterate that at no stage did I ever believe, and I don't think Mark Thompson ever believed, he'd been a coach at Geelong for 12 years or 11 years. No time did Danny Corcoran, who'd been around football, believe that performance-enhancing drugs were entering our club, and we still don't believe that.
Before we talk about the personal impact on how this has played out in your life, talk a little bit about ASADA. Were you given any instructions from anyone at Essendon or the AFL as to how to approach your interview with ASADA?
Yes, I was told to tell the whole truth, except about what Andrew Demetriou said to David Evans that night on the 4th of February.
So in other words, don't say that Andrew Demetriou had leaked the information to the club?
Yes.
Were you asked that by ASADA?
I was asked that and I told the truth. I told it how I told you half an hour ago.
Why do you think that you were given that advice? Who gave you that advice?
Well, David Evans gave me that advice. I think that's common knowledge. Well, because I don't think he wanted Andrew exposed in that way.
Then come numerous leaks from the confidential ASADA interim report to the point where ASADA has to threaten legal action against the AFL unless these leaks are stopped. There's also a story leaked that back in 2011 you'd been interviewed by an ASADA official and an AFL integrity officer about inquiries that you'd been making about peptides. And the story starts to be told, a picture is beginning to emerge that painted you in not a very good light. Can you tell us about that meeting with ASADA and the integrity official?
That was a conversation that I was at training one day in 2012, and I'd heard about a thing called pep types, and the ASADA drug tester who was there, I asked him, "Have you heard of pep types?" And he said no. 2 weeks later, Paul Hamilton asked me to come with him to AFL House, and myself, Danny Corcoran, Paul Hamilton met with Brett Clothier and a member from ASADA, and they talked to us about peptides and what they were. At no time were we given a warning. At no time were we told that these things are the worst things in the world. And the story that was in the paper and the story that's been put round that I was warned off them is just not right. It's a lie.
Before the ASADA investigation is done, the AFL issues sanctions against you and others, which lead to your 12-month suspension. And in part, it reads, James Hird contributed to Essendon's failure to take sufficient steps to ensure the health, welfare and safety of players in relation to the program. When he became aware of facts that suggested that unsatisfactory practices were occurring, the action he took was not sufficient to stop those practices. And as senior coach, he shares responsibility for the inadequate governance within the EFC's football department. Is part of your issue that clearly the AFL sees it as a shared responsibility, and yet in the public domain at least, you're being held up as the sole responsible party?
Look, I'm very disappointed at that time and what happened. I just want to say that I'm upset because 34 players are now seen as drug cheats have been found guilty by CADS, which I think is the wrong decision. That ultimately is why I'm upset. I'm disappointed in that time because I believe that we were told by the AFL, the club and myself, that if we do this, particularly myself, I was told that if we do this, that the club would be in a better position. The club would be able to move on in 2014 and this would end. And also that further members of the Essendon Football Club wouldn't be sacked and that the club would be better off if I took that deal. So I can't afford to get upset whether people think I was solely responsible, less responsible. I had a level of responsibility and I accept that. But what I am upset about is that we were told along the way that if that were to happen, the players would move on. Now that clearly hasn't happened.
Part of the reason why that hasn't happened also is that ASADA's investigation ran for 16 months. It comes to a close. As that's happening, you and the club challenge the legality of the joint AFL-ASADA investigation in the federal court. That case is lost. Against the advice of the club, you decide to appeal that case. We're now heading towards 2015. Are you now prolonging the pain for the club and the players in order to protect your own reputation?
Not at all. There's no doubt that the federal court case prolonged it. But that federal court case wasn't about my own reputation. That was about trying to get natural justice or due process for the players. The players weren't given due process. The evidence that was given to ASADA was influenced by the AFL. I mean, the AFL, the federal court, I don't have to say it, because the federal court found that the AFL tried to influence the writing of the report and influence the way that information was presented. So I think that it might have prolonged it. And I can understand why the AFL, why ASADA, why WADA, why CAS want to send a strong message to drug cheats, to athletes around the world. It's a very important message. Drugs aren't good and they shouldn't be in sport. But unfortunately in this case, and that's why I went to the federal court, 34 men were the sacrificial lambs to send that message. And that's not good enough in my opinion. You cannot sacrifice 34 innocent men to send a message like that. Although it's a good message, you cannot sacrifice 34 men.
But the problem exists that no one can say for certain what they were injected with.
Stephen Dank can say for certain what they're injected with. But if that's the case, if no one can say for certain what they're injected with, then how can 34 men be found guilty by CAS? I can understand that people saying that the club can't say what they're injected with. But CAS cannot say what they're injected with. So you're asking the players to prove their innocence.
Is that a question, though, that will haunt you for a long time? What were they given?
Well, I don't say it will haunt me. What will haunt me is that the players are put in a position where they're seen as drug cheats. And I don't want history to see those players as drug cheats. That's what will haunt me.
All right, let's move on to the personal impact of all of this. It's described as the biggest drug scandal in Australian sport. How do you feel about your name being central to that scandal?
Look, I'm very disappointed that my name is central to it. I don't believe, after reading the CAS report, that it should be the biggest drug scandal. I don't believe those players are guilty. It'll always be a huge saga. But the end of that saga that found them guilty, I look at what the AFL's own tribunal did to find them innocent. And I look at their decision and the way they made their decision. And I look at the CAS decision. And I believe that decision to actually go and send a message to the world is part of where we're all going to be seen. But ultimately, it's not about how I'm seen, it's about how those 34 players are seen. Because I'm not a victim, Bruce Reed's not a victim. The real victims, or the only victims, are 34 players who, along the last 3 years, at so many levels have been let down.
Lifelong relationships have clearly been destroyed throughout this whole process. What's been the biggest cost for you?
Well, there's a lot of personal friends that have gone, but I think the toll on the family is, it's been very bad. But as I said, it's not about us. It is about those 34 players.
34 players believe they never deliberately cheated, and yet, Jobe Watson, Mark McVeigh, Dyson Heppel, 31 others now have to live with that beyond 2016 when and if they come back to play the game. That is a label they will always carry with them. There's probably some watching tonight who want to hear from you how you feel about what they're enduring.
I think it's terrible. I feel very, very upset for them as people. Don't worry about footballers, don't worry, it's about them as people. And I'm very, very close to some of those boys. I'm closer to some than I was to others. You watch them grow up from a very young age to where they are now. And it's devastating to think that those players are branded as drug cheats. And that's why it's important going forward that this never, ever happens again. The process doesn't happen again. It doesn't happen again like it did at the Essendon Football Club. But that the CAS decision is not allowed to send a message to the world to try and remove drugs. It's a good message, but don't sacrifice 34 men for that reason.
We know that when they walk down the street, people yell things at them, they've been spat at, they get booed when they play games. These are things that they'll have to deal with, each and every one of them. What about your own kids? How do you explain to your children what this is all about?
My children have lived it. They've lived it. My oldest daughter, she's 16, she's seen it. My youngest son is 6, and he was 3 when this started, so it's been a huge part of his life. So But as I said, that victim role for us, it has to be about the players. I mean, we can sit back with my friends and my family and talk about it in private, but I think that the real impact is on 34 players who are sitting there going, what have I done? Why am I in this? I have done nothing wrong. Why am I in this position? And that's fair.
What is the hardest part for you? We've spoken about blame, we've spoken about responsibility, naivety, but also you mentioned that sense of guilt. Is it the guilt? Is it the guilt that you could have done more, you should have done more, you should have seen warning signs?
I think the guilt's a big part of it, but the most upsetting thing is just to look at a great player like Joe Watson, or a great player like Dyson Heppel, or a great person and player like Brent Stanton, Michael Hurley, all these people, David Myers, and you look at them and you go, this is so unfair, and they've been let down at so many levels. So there's guilt on our behalf, but I think that's self-serving. I think that is something that you can wallow in your own guilt. For me now, it's about how do you actually try and help if you can, and try and help these people.
Has the experience changed you, either as a person or your outlook on life? Has it changed your perspective?
It's definitely, an experience like this can't help but change certain elements of you as a person.
And what's changed?
Well, I think you're a lot harder. You don't trust as much. But ultimately, I think you still are the person you are, and you put your faith in good values and good people. And I believe that will serve the players well, and it will serve the other people who've been involved in this well.
How many of the players that you're not in touch with do you think are struggling with this at the moment? I know that some have spoken to you, others haven't, and I know there's degrees as to how people are coping. What can you do now to try and make it better for them?
Well, I think it's been there to talk to them and offer support, and I suppose it's some years of wisdom that, and having watched them and having known them before this and how good of people they are, and try and help them in that sense. And it may be to help them train. It may be to help them work out what their future is in terms of the direction they take with an appeal or not an appeal. It may be just to sit down and talk to them and listen to them and get things off their chest. So that will play out, but I certainly hope that I can be there in the future to help those players, because as I said, this is devastating for everyone, but for them it's extremely devastating.
I wonder, James, how much of you agreeing to do this interview tonight, part of that is because you also want to be absolved. You also have been held in high esteem throughout your playing career. You moved into coaching, a senior role. You had these young lives that you were looking after. You said yourself you wanted to create the best environment for them. In the event that didn't happen, are you also looking to be absolved in the eyes of the world when this story is told in years to come?
Look, I'm not sure absolution will come for myself in this story. I think enough people have believed what they believe, but the reason to be here tonight, and the main reason to be here tonight, is because I don't want history to view the players as being drug cheats, because they're not. Is it good to talk? Yes, it's good to get some of these things off your chest. But the main reason to be here is because I want people to understand that these players did not take drugs and they did nothing wrong.
What questions do you still have for the various entities that were part of this process and the failings of it? Or have you had time to think about this and you have all the answers to the questions you have? No, there's plenty of questions. I still want to know where Stephen Dank got the thymosin from. I mean, we saw photos of thymomodulin that he had. And thymomodulin is approved. Is approved. We saw a spreadsheet with thymomodulin on it. So I believe, that's why I believe. But I still want him to sit down in front of the 34 players and their families, and hopefully myself, and tell us where he got it from and to show us for our own benefit. Will that help the players in the future? I don't know. I want to know why the AFL saw its duty to put this out in the public forum. Why wasn't ASADA allowed to do its job and investigate Essendon, which is an important investigation, and keep it private? Why were we told
that we had to prove we were innocent? Why did an AFL commissioner tell me that we had to prove we were innocent because the public knew or thought we were guilty? Why did it go down this path? And ultimately, why did Kaz make a decision to go down the path that did to send a message and really sacrifice 34 young men?
And have you had any of those answers sufficiently? Have you asked the people that can give you those answers?
No, I haven't. No, I haven't had an opportunity to do that. I would like to ask those questions.
Is that going to be part of the process that is still to come?
I hope so. I haven't probably thought that far. I think after Tuesday that the thought process for me was really around how do I try and help the players who I think have had the wrong thing done by them.
So what are your plans now? And I ask you this because under the current system, the new anti-doping code and the new WADA policy, had this not happened in 2013 and had this happened now, there's every possibility that James Hird would be banned from sport. You're not in that situation because it happened in 2013 and not now. But when you look back on that and you consider your place in things, how delicate is it? And how delicate do you feel about what unfolded?
Oh, I don't feel delicate about I don't feel that my role was to give players performance-enhancing drugs. I don't believe they were given it, and at no time did I advocate anything to do with a banned drug.
You're still so adamant about that. Do you think there's a possibility that sometime in the future we are going to find out that never happened?
That they were given? Well, no, I don't believe it. I mean, yes, there's a possibility. I mean, I don't know what Stephen Dank. No one knows except Stephen Dank what he put in those injections. But I don't see why he would do it. What would be the purpose for him to do it? It doesn't make any sense as to why he would do it.
So do you, in some ways, still have faith in the job Stephen Dank was doing?
I have faith that there's no... Why would he go and try and dope our players? It doesn't make any sense to me. If someone asks what is in it for Stephen Dank to do that, I don't see that. There's no rational reason why he would do that.
We know that the current president of Essendon, Lindsay Tanner, has left the door slightly ajar for the possibility that James Hird may come back to a club that the Hird family is synonymous with. Your father played there, your grandfather played there, he became president. Do you feel not being part of the club at the moment leaves a hole inside you? Do you see a future back at the club, or is there too much pain associated with what's gone on and with what people think your role was for you to be able to have a future there?
Oh, I think there'll be a time in the future. I'd love to go back and see. The Essendon Football Club is a huge part of my life, but I haven't thought about going back to the football club because it's about those 34 players and helping those 34 players. The football club will survive. It's a very good football club with incredible supporters, and it will grow and it will one day be successful again. And I think Lindsay Tanner started off on the right step, and it's not for me to tell him what to do, but it should get all the Essendon supporters behind the club, and it will be successful again.
And what are you going to do?
Well, as I said, I want to put some time into helping the players, and then I want to get on with my life.
And what does that include?
Time will tell, Tracy. Time will tell.
What have you learnt from this that you'd be able to write in a manual for all future coaches of all sports, all teams, about the what to do, the what not to do, the what to be wary of?
I think it's quite boring what I would write, and that is that your processes are perfect and they're double checked and have people looking across the processes and checked all the time, and that you should always be aware for things that you're not, be on the lookout for things that you really don't think can happen, because this was not something that I ever contemplated being part of my coaching career. And it is an extraordinary event, but make sure you're very diligent in your processes and you have other people looking over them as well.
We know that there are many other people in this story that still have a lot of questions to be answered. We spoke about some of those, probably Dr. Bruce Reid, probably Andrew Demetriou, probably David Evans. In fact, not probably, most definitely. We're going to have to try and find their stories at a different time. But from your perspective and tonight's perspective, thank you for telling your story.
Thank you, Tracy.
The top stories from ABC News. I'm Catherine Robinson. Former Essendon coach James Hird has taken some responsibility for the suspensions handed to his former players during an exclusive interview with ABC News 24. Last week, 34 Essendon players were banned from playing for 12 months after the Court of Arbitration for Sport found them guilty of committing an anti-doping rule violation. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has released the names of a couple abducted by suspected militants in Burkina Faso. Dr. Ken and Jocelyn Elliott are originally from Perth and have been living in the West African nation for 40 years.